Okay, hello everyone. My name is Roman Stilling from Germany. I'm not representing an institute per se, but representing an organization which is very similar to other European organizations that do similar things, that is outreach and advocacy on animal research. So it's called Tierversuche verstehen, which translates to understanding animal research, basically, and that already tells you that there are similar organizations, for example, in the UK. Um, I want to talk about briefly what kind of impact our communication activities may have and what kind of goals we actually set and what we can hope for as a community, not only as our organization. So if we talk about the goals, then let's think about why do we want to actually talk about animal research more openly, more publicly, more transparently? And what kind of goals do we want to achieve by doing this? So, for example, I think when we direct public communication towards the broad interested public, like all the citizens, politicians, decision makers, and so on, competent authorities, regulators, and all these different stakeholders, I think we could probably all more or less agree on a few goals that this kind of communication should achieve. And this is, for example, that these stakeholders understand the how and the why of animal research. What is actually happening? Why is it happening? What are alternatives? What are not alternatives? And so on. So just basic facts and figures, for example. I think we could also agree that we want the public debate to be factual and based on facts and evidence. We would probably also want these stakeholders to appreciate and understand that there may be different perspectives. So just see that different stakeholders have different perspective and appreciate that these exist and that there's not only one perspective on this topic. I think it's also very important, maybe crucial even, to actually get across what is at stake in this debate. Why do we actually do this kind of communication and outreach? Why do we want to disseminate the information? Is because we want to know everyone who is making decisions and contributing to debate knows what is actually happening and what are the alternatives of, for example, not doing this type of experiments. Then we come to maybe some goals that maybe that you may have, but that may be more controversial. Let's say make stakeholders appreciate that there are no easy answers in this debate and that there's only not one right or wrong decision. So this becomes a bit more normative. Do we actually want to tolerate them to animal research exists? Or if you even go further, which might be more debatable, I think, is not only to tolerate, but even accept and embrace that animal research is happening, or even in a more positive way, support animal research and particularly researchers in any way, through debate or through funding or whatever. So these are all different goals, and I think for all of these different goals that you might have, you need to design different communication based on these different goals. So what are different forms of communication? I already touched upon this. There is advocacy and there is outreach. And I think if you look at the advocacy, some of these tools or forms of communication, some of the goals that advocacy has, for example, looking for allies or support, trying to convince stakeholders, demanding change, so having an own agenda, campaigning, maybe even lobbying. Some others maybe just put the topics on the agenda of the debates, shaping these debates by informing, education, engagement, and increasing visibility for the particular topic you're advocating for. But what's the difference to outreach? I think mostly outreach is a subset of this kind of advocacy. So with outreach, you could also put something on the agenda, shape debates, and by informing and education, by disseminating important information for a debate. But I think one difference here to advocacy is really that you want to have transparency, and that may have also other consequences than just the ones that you focus on when you advocate for something. But the problem with transparency is that even if we agree that transparency is necessary, we often forget that transparency isn't the whole picture. So we should not confuse transparency with visibility, for example. And what do I mean by this is illustrated by these types of filter bubbles that we all live in. We all, especially when we use the internet or social media platforms, then our feeds is dominated by what we like, what we prefer, what we already think gets re-instructed, gets reinforced. We only see people who have similar opinions, and people in other bubbles that might not intersect each other. And that's why information that is just there does not automatically mean that it is seen or recognized by other people in other filter bubbles. Also, transparency is not the same as understanding. I will give you maybe a bit controversial example of this, but I think it illustrates quite well what I mean by this. Just because information is there doesn't necessarily mean that it's understood and well received. You probably all know that the European Commission is extremely transparent in certain ways on animal research in the EU. For example, by the Allurus statistical databases that exists for quite a while now. The interesting thing is that if you take a closer look at this, you'll be completely overwhelmed by the amount of information, by the organization of the information, and you have to be kind of an expert already to understand what this information actually means. For example, the statistics, the animal use statistics, are separated in 3 different sections that are partially overlapping, and will give you an enormous amount of detail, but to make actually any sense out of it, to interpret all this data, that is extremely difficult. The same is true for the transparency that is done by using these NTS, the non-technical project summaries, that every licensed and authorized project in the EU has to submit. There's a huge database where you can search for, and there's thousands and thousands of PDF pages where all this information is gathered, and it's extremely overwhelming, all this information, and to actually make any sense out of it, you will have to be a scientist or an expert to actually use this. So what I'm trying to say is all this transparency is good, but it's not necessary for understanding and good communication. Another problem with transparency is that it does not automatically build trust, and we often tend to think that once we're transparent, we say, well, everything is here. You can have a look at our websites. You can talk to us. You can ask us questions. We are completely transparent. It doesn't necessarily build trust, and that is a finding that is from communications researchers. On the other hand, the problem is that intransparency can build mistrust. So that is also a very clear finding from research into how people perceive good communication. So summarizing this means that transparency and openness are necessary to reach any of these goals I showed in the beginning, but they are not sufficient to reach these goals. And we have identified a few additional requirements, for example, that, as I said, we need to convert transparency to visibility to make these facts and figures and the information that the scientific community wants to provide actually visible and not only present. And we have to achieve some form of understanding in the general public or in the different stakeholders, or at least, let's say, some sort of trust, even if people would not say that they understand fully what is at stake and what are the different details of all the different aspects of animal research, but at least they have to feel that someone is taking care of this in a good faith. And I think that is something that is sometimes missing in all the communication activities that we trying to do. So going back to all these different goals and how to achieve them, I think to reach these goals, information is not enough and transparency is not enough, but we need more public engagement. And that means more visibility, providing dialogue and trying to create trust through competent and trustworthy people actually that are working in these facilities and in the institutions and different campuses. And I think we shouldn't be too naive in what type of goals we can actually achieve through good communications. On the other hand, it's an absolute must to move forward in any direction. So with this, I want to thank you. Take any questions, and if you have any questions afterwards, you can always reach out to us in German or in English. Most of our materials, unfortunately, is in German. And since yesterday, we're not only on Twitter any longer, but also on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and other platforms. So thank you very much.